Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for the invitation to come and speak to you about a group of topics that I love dearly. So the project we're looking at today was a scoping project. So it was done a couple of years ago. The project was integrating blue economy governance integrity research, but the research that we put in place here, it was a scoping project, then fed into another project that we're about 2/3 of the way through right now. And so I'll be talking a little bit about what's flowed on from the scoping project itself. So just a little bit about us. So the project was led out of Griffith University and the institute I work for there, which is the Institute for Ethics, Governance and Law, headed by Charles Sanford, who was project leader. So what do? We do ethics and we do governance stuff. Prior to this, we didn't do blue economy. So we moved from project to project, from one different area to another, looking at different types of industries, looking at different types of social, political, economic problems, and investigating them and trying to work out how can this system work better, how can the elements within it be integrated better to give us better outcomes for consumers, for clients, for society as a whole. And that gives us a bit of an interesting perspective when we come to new industries like the blue economy that are functioning in interesting ways and that have new features in play that we haven't come across before. So I'll talk a little bit about that in what follows. So it's a multidisciplinary team, so it has people like me. I'm an ethicist, I'm a moral philosopher, so that's my training. I'm interested in ethical theories and in the judgments and ethical decision making that all of us undertake every day, especially in our professional lives. But we also have law people, governance people, sociologists sometimes, and we bring on board the various personnel that we need to run the projects that we do because we don't know everything and we need to learn quickly. So in this particular project, we had 3 planned projects all falling in RP5, ethics, values and social license in the blue economy. And I'll go on to speak a little bit more about that because that's the one that we're still currently doing. Blue economy integrity system analysis, and blue economy certification system project. So what was our motivation? Why were we interested in doing this? Well, a major part of it is a learning process, especially because it was a scoping project, because we're interested in, well, how does ethics function in this domain? How do the laws get made? How do the people make decisions? If there are problems that are arising, how are those playing out? What types of social pressures are being put on various people? How does media and government and academia all play out in this space? So we're interested in how ethics works. We're also interested in what practical steps would improve ethical outcomes. There's always a variety of different tasks that we can perform when we're trying to offer resources to government, to policymakers, but also resources to practitioners who just need help in being able to implement the things that they want to implement on the basis of their values. We were interested in challenges and opportunities presented by particular features like the social license to operate. Now, most of you are probably pretty familiar with this, but I might not need to tell you that this is odd terminology. This doesn't pop up in most industries, most professions. It doesn't even for aquaculture and for renewable energy offshore. It doesn't even play out in other jurisdictions. So language and processes that might be really central to the way we in Australia are looking at a particular issue may not be pertinent to the ways it's being looked at or it's being interrogated in other places. So that was something we had particular interest in. And in general, we're interested in the interaction of ethical standard setting, legal regulation, economic incentives and institutional design to improve the realisation of the values that the blue economy seeks to create and to further. And they're all separate things, right? So if I can just go to the integrity systems approach. So the integrity systems approach is holistic. It's one of those ones that says, okay, we need to look at a whole bunch of different institutions. We need to look at a whole bunch of different factors that are in play because they will all play out in different ways. It doesn't matter if everybody has their heart in the right place if the economic incentives are all skewed in the opposite direction. It doesn't matter if the economic incentives are all skewed in one particular direction if there is no legal mechanism by which those values can play out. So the integrity systems approach is one of trying to look at legal regulation, policy and institutional design, the ethical codes, ethically informed decision making that happen by practitioners on the ground, things like certification, other governance measures, economic incentives and disincentives, what are pulling and pushing people in particular directions, and also social concerns and media involvement, journalistic involvement, and things that play out in what we'd now call social license to operate. So what was our methodology? It involved workshops, lots of practitioner interviews. We've been interviewing people for a few years now because we flowed that into our next project, and literature review of scholarly and grey literature. And I'll mention more about the literature review as we go on, because I want to show you something on my final slide. And so just mentioning in particular, so my discipline is the discipline of moral philosophy, and so that's where we look at ethical theories, but we also look at the way principles play out. It's a bit like discussing things in law, except we don't have those final ultimate texts in law. We're looking at the types of ethical principles and values that people have, and then we're looking at the way that they play out and the way they intersect, and sometimes the way that they will clash, and how they are put together in people's reasoning that leads them to particular types of action. So findings were pretty preliminary. We settled some definitions. We looked at blue economy values from interviews and literature. I'll get to that in a moment. But I do want to highlight here the complexity and challenges of the integrity system. This was one of the first things that became apparent to us, and we've heard it already in a number of the presenters who've already spoken to us today. The dynamism of this industry, the fact that things are happening quickly, the fact that technology is moving swiftly, but along with technology, industry is growing, it's moving into new places it hasn't been. That very dynamism creates its own ethical concerns because it impacts on the second feature, which is uncertainty, which is our levels of ignorance about not knowing quite what's profitable and what won't be profitable, not knowing quite what the environmental impacts are going to be, and finally not knowing the social sustainability factors. How are people going to respond to this? Are we actually treading on toes and influencing things in ways that we didn't realize we were? So you've got all of those things rolling along. Added to them, Darian mentioned earlier, the fact that this is a challenging space to get governance right in. It's not an area that we've been developing governance systems for thousands of years on. It's happening offshore. It's often in opaque cases. Sometimes it's happening under the water. Sometimes it's happening at night. Sometimes it's not even clear where the jurisdictional boundaries are. There are lots of reasons why this is happening out of sight. And then that governance challenge creates its own layer that sits across all of this stuff. And then finally, we have the fact, as well as having that dynamism, as well as having that uncertainty, as well as having those governance challenges, you have major values in play. And I don't need to tell you what major values we have in play, because you all know the types of things I'd be thinking about, because I guarantee you pretty much everyone in this room has a story in their history about the ocean, about how much they love the ocean, about some experiences they had with the ocean that led them to be sitting here today, that led them into the types of careers that they've got. So we've got major values at stake, but at the same time, we've got these serious challenges that are confronting us. So the ultimate aim is to provide resources and guidance on how we can contribute to different parts of the blue economy integrity system. I'll skip down to how does this help us reimagine the reimagining question? How does it help us reimagine oceans' access to certainty and enduring ocean industries and community? Well, in the long run, one of the most important things that we can possibly do is to ensure that social sustainability. That's the only way that we play the long game here. That's the only way that we guarantee that things will happen, not just now, not just in 5 years, but still be happening in 20 and 30 years. And what do we need to do that? Well, it's a complicated question, of course, but being clear about what our values are, knowing to ourselves what our values are, and being proactive in talking about them, discussing them with other people, and thinking hard about how we implement them in the behaviours that we do every day, in the projects and plans that we put together, and in the operations that we design and the technologies that we create. And let me just finish. So I mentioned scholarly literature earlier. So just so I'm giving you, oops, one too far. Just so I'm giving you a little bit of something tangible to grip onto. So this is recent publication, just came out a couple of months ago in Fish and Fisheries. So this was us looking at aquaculture ethical principles. What are the ethical principles that came up in the scholarship when the scholars were looking at aquaculture? They were critiquing it or praising it. What were the types of things that came up? And then we Once we got an enormous list of values, then we bundled them under various categories. You can see there how it played out. Environmental protection at the top, beneficence, stakeholder acceptance and fairness coming in soon after, and then things like harm prevention, inclusive participation, and community. Just one oddity on that is, you might think, what's missing from that? And one of the curious things that was missing, the last thing I'll say before I go, was things like integrity. So something like honesty. And the thing that was odd about that was that we had lots and lots of papers talking about all these types of values. And then when they got to what should we do, what needs to be done to fix things up, they all went straight to governance. They all went straight to concerns with, can we trust what's going on? Can we hold people accountable for what's being done? So in the critical analysis that we did of the literature that was out there, we said, yep, these are all great values that we should have, but we need to add things like integrity, honesty, accountability, transparency to them, because they are the way that we show people that these are what's coming through, and that's critical to bring them on board with the future we want to get to. All right, I'll leave it there. Thanks, Nancy.